Dear colleagues, I think we will be starting. So my name is Dmitry Polyansky. I'm first deputy permanent representative of Russia to the UN, in case somebody doesn't know me. To my left is Nadezhda Sokolova, our main expert on disarmament, biology, chemistry issues. Thank you very much for participating in our event that we host today. This Arria-formula meeting of the Security Council is the next one in the series of discussions on the military biological activities on the territory of Ukraine that we had in the Council recently. As you all know, since we stated that on numerous occasions, in the course of the special military operation in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense discovered evidence that Ukrainian authorities, supported and directly sponsored by the US Department of Defense, were implementing dangerous projects and experiments as a part of military biological program. These activities had been carried out on the Ukrainian territory, in the middle of Eastern Europe, and in the close proximity to Russian borders for many years, posing a direct threat to biological security of our country and the region. These findings are very alarming. They clearly show that the risk to international peace and security emanating from such activities in violation of the Biological Weapons Convention is real. No country, neither in Europe nor in Asia, in Africa or Latin America, is safe, as biothreats resulting from the use of bioweapons respect no borders. This is why the bioweapons are being considered as one of the most horrible and inhumane methods of warfare. The use of bacteriological methods of warfare was prohibited yet in 1925 with the adoption of the Geneva Protocol for the prohibition of the use in war of asphyxiating, poisonous and other gases, and of bacteriological methods of warfare. In 1975, the Biological Weapons Convention, BWC, entered into force. It prohibited the development, production and stockpiling of bacteriological, biological and toxic weapons. The United States carries out military biological activities outside the national territory in many countries and regions across the globe. Ukraine is just one of the examples. These activities lack transparency since the US refuses to provide any information about them. In particular, what the real intention of the US side in these projects and the relationship of such activities with the US Department of Defense are, and why the Pentagon is so deeply involved. At the same time, the US, though being one of the BWC depository governments, rejected in 2001 and since then has been exclusively opposing development of a legally binding protocol to the BWC with efficient verification mechanism. We are really worried about this issue and believe that the international community should be kept alert. The developing countries are especially vulnerable and should be protected from a threat of becoming a territory for dangerous biological experiments. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our briefers today, who have exceptional expertise on matters related to military biology and are widely known to general public and invest relentless efforts to educate the international community on the actual situation around biolaboratories across the globe. Our first briefer needs no introduction indeed. We have the honor to welcome General Igor Kirillov, the Commander-in-Chief of Radiologic, Chemical and Biological Defense of the Russian Armed Forces. I'm sure his face is very familiar to you, and you have heard his name in the briefings on the situation in Ukraine. General Kirillov is second to none when it comes to knowledge on the actual developments on the ground. The team he leads prepared a detailed and factual presentation. It is a rare opportunity to learn all of this in such a systematic way and firsthand. Since his schedule is extremely packed, as you can imagine, he sent us a pre-recorded video with his presentation. Our second briefer is an independent journalist from Bulgaria, Dilyana Gaitandzhieva. She is also the Middle East correspondent and the founder of Arms Watch. Over the last years, she has published a series of revealing reports on weapons supplies to terrorists in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. Her current work is focused on documenting war crimes and illicit arms exports to war zones around the world. She is a courageous lady who was the first European journalist who raised the issue about the Pentagon-funded biolaboratories as early as in 2018 and broadcast a documentary on one of these laboratories in Georgia. I would like to stress that she has been studying this issue long before the UN discussion on this topic started. We are also very glad to welcome today Mr. Arkady Mamontov, a renowned Russian TV journalist and TV host. He was very modest while presenting his biography, where he just stated that he is engaged in investigative journalism. But I can tell you that in Russia, Arkady Mamontov is a household name. He has been producing eye-opening documentaries for decades on a wide range of most serious and urgent topics. He is one of the patriarchs of the investigative journalism in Russia, and we are very glad to have him with us today. We hope that our briefers will help all of us improve and expand the optics for the discussions of this issue in the United Nations. Without further ado, I will ask to play the presentation of General Kirillov, who is our first briefer today.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Russian Federation has repeatedly pointed to violations by a number of states of their obligations on the non-proliferation of biological weapons. I would like to remind that the main document in this field is the Convention on the Prohibition of Toxin and Biological Weapons, dated 1972. This treaty, unlike the Convention on the Prohibition of the Development, Production, Stockpiling, and Use of Chemical Weapons and on their destruction, doesn't have a clear mechanism to verify its compliance, rules and procedures for inspection control. In addition, there is no permanent executive body to control the activities of the member states. The existing mechanism proposed by the United Nations Secretary General for investigation of the alleged use of biological and toxin weapons doesn't cover the inspection of the activities of member states in the biological field. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons in Hague also has nothing to do with prohibition of biological weapons. The Russian Federation is constantly making attempts to establish a legally binding mechanism to verify and inspect the BTWC. However, this initiative has been blocked continuously by the United States for over 20 years. Taking advantage in the gaps of international legislation, the American administration is consecutively increasing its military biological potential in various regions of the world. According to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China, the Pentagon controls 336 labs in 30 states outside of the national jurisdiction. About 60 of such facilities, modernized since 2005 at the expense of the United States Department of Defense, are located throughout the territories bordering Russia and China. At the same time, we are noticing a certain pattern in the deployment of American biological laboratories outside the United States territory. First, a certain concern is expressed about the biological or epidemiological situation in a given region. Then, an incentive, including financial incentive to officials, primarily ministries of health officials and workers, in order to combine efforts is provided. Ultimately, a biofacility is constructed and linked to a unified network of global biological control. The activities of these facilities are focused on three main areas: the The first one is monitoring the biological situation, as the Pentagon states, in the inspected areas for the deployment of military contingents of NATO member states. Second area involves the collection and export of strains of dangerous microorganisms to the United States. The third area involves scientific research activities aimed at studying potential biological weapons agents specific to a given region, which have natural foci and can infect humans. Along with the United States Department of Defense, the United States Agency for International Development, George Soros Foundation, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention are directly involved in the implementation of these programs. The scientific counseling is provided by several leading scientific research organizations, including the Los Alamos National Laboratory, which was directly involved in the development of nuclear weapons as part of the Manhattan Project. Equally important is the role of the United States Army Edgewood Chemical Biological Center. The main contractors of the United States Department of Defense are the Metabiota, Black & Veatch, trusted with the construction of biofacilities and the supply of equipment for the Pentagon's biolabs around the world. The overall amount of funding for these contracting organizations exceeded $5 billion starting from 2005. All this activity is carried out under full supervision of the United States Department of Defense, and Georgian and Ukrainian facilities have become the most significant elements of the deployed network of biolaboratories. In Georgia, there is the Lugar Center for Public Health, opened in 2011. Its construction, according to the information published on the United States Federal Contract System website, cost the Pentagon more than 160 million United States dollars. Our main concern is the fact that 2 floors of the new building are completely allocated to the United States Army authorities, and it also has special areas dedicated for treatment and handling of patients infected with pathogens of especially dangerous infections. Especially noteworthy is the fact that this center is not like a typical plague control station. It has several changes. The area of zoned premises increased by 16 times, from 500 to 8,000 meters squared. And also the number of employees is increased by 4 times, from 50 to 200 people. The number of studied pathogens of dangerous infectious diseases increased by more than 2 times, from 14 to 31. And so the question arises, for the fulfillment of which tasks were such requirements laid down? I would like to underline that the Georgian workers cannot move freely around the center, and they don't have access to American documents. This is done under the pretext of United States legal restriction on access to classified programs and restricted quarters. It is not surprising that the employees of the Lugar Center, citizens of Georgia, have no information about classified researches of the Pentagon taking place in the laboratory. Please now direct your attention to slide number 6. The United States military biologists working at the center enjoy diplomatic immunity. This is provided for by the relevant United States-Georgian agreement dated 2002, which is publicly accessible. Especially noteworthy is the document addressed to the Ministry of Health of Georgia confirming notification procedure of the transportation of biological materials using diplomatic channels without any kind of border control procedures and without submitting these materials to local supervisory authorities. This undermines the meaning, the concept of the diplomatic immunity, and allows the members of the United States armed forces to carry out tasks and instructions of their government in circumvention of Georgian legislation. It is not surprising that the focus of these activities is not dealing with pressing healthcare issues and problems, primarily socially significant diseases such as tuberculosis or AIDS. Please now draw your attention to slide number 7. It shows contracts between the Ministry of Health of Georgia and the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, the Defense Threat Reduction Office, and the United States Department of Energy, National Nuclear Security Administration. The documents demonstrate that in the list of United States research priorities are the potential agents of biological weapons, such as the pathogens of tularemia, anthrax, brucellosis, dengue fever, Crimean Congo fever, and certain other diseases transmitted by blood-sucking insects. The atypical forms of plague are of particular interest to the United States. The search for such pathogens is carried out in foci throughout Georgia and in close proximity to the Russian border. The published materials enable us to get a new perspective of the biological situation in the south of Russia. Slide number 8 shows the spread of African swine fever from Georgia to the Russian Federation, Europe, and China since 2007. In the territories of these states, strains of ASF virus identical to the strain of Georgia 2007 were found in samples taken from dead animals. There is a high degree of probability that the ASF strain with increased contagiousness was created in one of the biolabs subordinate to the Pentagon. The direct economic damage from this disease to the Russian businesses only amounted to more than $100 million, and the indirect losses exceeded $500 million. In the region where the Lugar Center is located, the situation with the insect vector spread diseases has deteriorated significantly. According to the data published on the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control website, the habitats of various species of mosquitoes previously found only in southern countries are shifting from Georgia to several territories of the Russian Federation. The spread of ticks has also caused an outbreak of Crimean Congo fever in Stavropol territory and Rostov territory. The abnormal trends of expansion of the habitats of insect vectors make us turn our attention to the patents issued by the United States Patent and Trademark Office on certain technical means of delivery of biological weapons. We're talking about the United States patent number 8967029 for an unmanned aerial vehicle capable of disseminating infected insects in the air. The description of the patent states that with the help of the system, enemy troops can be eliminated or incapacitated without endangering our own troops. Other patents show various types of munitions for the delivery of chemical and biological substances. Their description reads, low cost of employment, no need to contact the enemy troops directly. This corresponds to the non-contact warfare concept implemented by the United States. It also demonstrates the possibility of filling the capsules with poisonous, radioactive, narcotic substances, as well as pathogens of infectious diseases. Research and development of munitions not included in the list of conventional weapons and humane means of warfare violates the obligations of the United States taken under Article 4 of the BTWC and the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1540. In 2018, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs addressed the United States State Department with a request to give a legal assessment of the development of such devices in terms of the compliance with the Convention on the Prohibition of Chemical and Biological Weapons. The United States administration confined themselves to formal reply, cynically thanking the Russian side for drawing attention to this issue and pointing out the development and the production of biological and chemical weapons is prohibited by national law. However, the decision to issue a patent does not violate the United States obligations under the BTWC and the CWC. Thanks to a special operation of Russian military, the international community got access to the information on the illegal military biological research taking place in the Ukraine. A network of biolabs for research and control of the biological situation was formed on its territory, including 30 biological facilities in 14 settlements and populated areas. This is confirmed by the registration card signed by Viktor Polishuk, Deputy State Secretary of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. The legal basis for its signing was the agreement on cooperation between the United States Department of Defense and the Ukrainian Ministry of Health to prevent the spread of technologies, pathogens, and information that can be used to develop biological weapons. The funding of scientific projects amounted to approximately $32 million between 2015 and 2020 only. The text of the document states that the United States, its personnel and contractors are exempt from obligations to pay taxes or other similar fees that are levied in the territory of Ukraine. The registration card includes the full range of biofacilities as well as the contracting customer of the work, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency within the United States Department of Defense. One of the priorities of American customers is the anthrax agent, which is characterized by high lethality and resilience. The slide shows the document of the UP2 project. The aim of this project includes the identification of dead animal burial sites and taking samples of soil from these areas. The interest of American military biologists in the study and research of insect vectors and the locations of animal burial sites is also not accidental. Apparently, they analyzed the results of anthrax outbreak in the Yamalo-Nenets Autonomous District of Russia in 2016, during which several cases of the transmission of anthrax by flies and horseflies were recorded. Given that the overall epidemiological situation with anthrax in Ukraine remains positive, the question naturally arises: what is the reason for the ongoing research by the Pentagon, and what are the true goals of this research? Between 2005 and 2015, viable anthrax spores were sent from the United States Army Dugway Proving Ground to 194 recipients in 10 countries around the world. In South Korea alone, 23 exposed persons were isolated. The current situation with the distribution of pathogenic biomaterials from Ukraine to European countries can lead to death of people and the creation of a hotbed of epidemiological instability, the scale of which can be comparable to the COVID-19 pandemic. Until 2020, the labs in Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Odessa were implementing the UP4 project. Its purpose was to study the possibility of the spread of especially dangerous infections through migratory birds, including influenza A, whose lethality for humans reaches up to 50%, as well as the Newcastle disease. Due to the fact that Ukraine has a unique geographical position where transcontinental migration routes intersect, 145 biological species have been studied within the framework of this project. While doing this, at least 2 species of migratory birds which migration routes pass mainly through the territory of Russia were identified. At the same time, information about migration routes passing through the countries of Eastern Europe was summarized. Out of all the methods to destabilize the epidemiological situation, this option is one of the most reckless and irresponsible, since it impedes the control of the further development of the situation. This is confirmed by the course of the development of the pandemic of the novel coronavirus infection, COVID-19, the emergence and characteristics of which raise many questions among experts. Within the Flu Flyaway project, wild birds as vectors for the transmission of avian influenza were studied by the Kharkiv Institute of Veterinary Medicine. At the same time, the conditions that make the transition processes uncontrollable, cause economic damage, and create risks to food security were assessed. The documents obtained confirmed the involvement of the Kharkiv Institute in collection of strains of avian influenza viruses that have a high epidemic potential and are able to overcome the interspecies barrier. In 2021 alone, the damage from the avian influenza exceeded $20 million. 6 million domestic birds were disposed. European countries have lost about 25 million euros in agricultural industry due to this disease. Within the P781 project, bats are considered a biological weapon agent vectors. One of the main priorities of this project was the study and research of bacterial and viral pathogens that can be transmitted from bats to humans, such as plague, leptospirosis, brucellosis, as well as coronavirus and filovirus agents. It is noteworthy that the research is carried out in close proximity to the borders of Russia, in the areas of the Black Sea coast and in the Caucasus. The project has been implemented with the involvement of not only Ukrainian but also a Georgian biolab controlled by the Pentagon, in cooperation with the Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University and the United States Geological Survey. Documents received by the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation indicate that the research in this area were systematic in nature and have been carried out since at least 2009 under direct supervision of experts from the United States as part of the B382, 444, and 568 projects. In the course of the implementation, 6 families of viruses, including coronaviruses, and 3 types of pathogenic bacteria, causative agents of plague, brucellosis, and leptospirosis, were produced. This is due to the main characteristics of these pathogens that make them attractive for the artificial infection: drug resistance, rapid spread from animals to humans, etc. In accordance with the UB8 project, blood samples were taken from 4,000 servicemen in Lviv, Kharkiv, Odessa, and Kiev to detect the antibodies specific to hantaviruses, and from 400 to detect the antibodies specific to the Crimean Congo fever virus. Such a large-scale screening of natural immunity of the population was probably carried out in order to select biological agents that are most dangerous for the population of a certain region. Especially noteworthy is the decision signed by the head of the Ethics Committee of the said center on June 12, 2019, as part of the UB8 project. The document includes the studies with an unknown risk to life and health of the participants, as well as the concealment of the identity. But the research program of this project means a standard blood sampling procedure only. In this case, the question arises: what kind of life-threatening tests are we talking about if the document states that minor incidents with volunteers must be reported to the United States Bioethics Committee, 72 hours after the occurrence, and serious ones, including death of the subjects within 24 hours. We cannot ignore the fact that the official research program is only the top of the iceberg, while in practice, volunteers could have been infected with the Crimean Congo fever virus, Hantavirus, and the causative agents of leptospirosis. I would also like to remind you that the representatives of Western countries are extremely cautious about the biomaterials being taken. This also applies to the European Union officials, including the French President Emmanuel Macron and the British Secretary of State for Defense Ben Wallace, who refused to be tested for COVID-19 during the official visits to the Russian Federation. At the same time, the available documents confirm numerous cases of blood samples, tissue, and human blood serum being sent abroad, as well as dangerous pathogens and their vectors from the territory of Ukraine. In doing so, more than 10,000 samples were sent to the Arria Center in Georgia. Also among the recipients are reference labs in the United Kingdom, Australia, the Friedrich Loeffler Institute. In total, the United States and its allies managed to export at least 16,000 biological samples from Ukraine. All of that pose a serious risk of transferring sensitive genetic information abroad, as well as threats to biological safety and security to the regions where these samples were transferred. We have analyzed the information about the tests carried out on Ukrainian servicemen. I would like to note that such studies and tests are prohibited in the United States and are carried out by the United States military outside of their national territory. We have received documents confirming attempts to try previously untested medicines on Ukrainian servicemen. We're talking about the deep drug, a system of pharmaceutical screening which has not undergone licensing procedure in the United States and Canada. Particularly cynical is the fact that the developer, the SkyMount company, offered to purchase the system on a commercial basis, despite the fact that the employees of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine and the servicemen were recruited as volunteers. Such unacceptable approaches with the tacit consent of the American administration appeared to be normal for large pharmaceutical companies. So, for example, in 2010, the Indonesian authorities shut down the United States Naval Medical Center in Jakarta due to numerous violations. The obtained materials were used in the interest of the Pentagon-affiliated pharmaceutical company Gilead Sciences Incorporated. We need to keep in mind that this company did studies of its Sovaldi drug at the Luger Center, which resulted in numerous deaths among the participants, among patients. We have already mentioned the studies and tests conducted within the UP8 project, which involved more than 4,000 participants. During these tests, approximately 20 Ukrainian soldiers died, and another 200 were hospitalized during the experiments in the Kharkiv laboratory alone. According to the available data, the evidence of violations of Article 1 and 4 of the BTWC in Ukrainian biological labs is being urgently destroyed. Back in early February, the most valuable samples of biomaterials were transported from Odessa to the United States by an American military transport aircraft, and the laboratory equipment was transported to Lviv by road. Starting from February 24th, the Ministry of Health of Ukraine ordered to completely destroy the pathogens in the laboratories. At the same time, the analysis of the instructions given to the laboratory workers indicate that the procedure is aimed at the irreversible destruction of the collections. The analysis of the certificates of destruction show that the work with the pathogens of plague, anthrax, brucellosis in the Lviv biological lab, pathogens of diphtheria, salmonellosis, and flux in the labs in Kharkiv and Poltava was conducted. In Lviv alone, 232 containers with the causative agents of leptospirosis, 30 with tularemia, 10 with brucellosis, and 5 with plague were destroyed. In total, more than 320 containers. The listed and excessive amount of biopathogens may indicate the work was conducted within the framework of military biological programs. Within the framework of the parliamentary investigation conducted by the Russian Federation, the facts of the deliberate distribution in 2020 of money bills infected with the Asian strain of tuberculosis among minors in the territory of the Luhansk People's Republic were exposed. The organizers of these crimes took advantage of the habits of little children to take everything into their mouths and also to take food with dirty hands. The incident is still being investigated. Our concern stems from the fact that, contrary to its international commitments and obligations, the United States has retained norms allowing the work in the field of biological weapons in its national legislation. The ratification of the protocol for the prohibition of the use of asphyxiating, poisonous, or other gases and of bacteriological methods of warfare by the United States was accompanied by a number of reservations that allow the reciprocal use of chemical and toxin weapons. In accordance with the United States federal law, uniting and strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism, Act, research in the field of biological weapons is permitted upon the approval of the United States government. Participants of such research are not subjected to criminal liability for the development of such weapons. Today, we can give you the names of the specific officials who took part in organizing and conducting military biological research in the territory of Ukraine. Among other officials, we can name Robert Pope, the director of the United States Defense Department's Cooperative Threat Reduction Program at the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, and Joanna Wintrol, head of the DTRA office in Ukraine. Also, we can name the representatives of the Pentagon contractors, the companies Medaviota, Black & Veatch, Lance Lippincott, David Mustra, Mary Gutierrez, Scott Thornton. Especially noteworthy is the fact that most of these activities were funded by the organizations close to the current United States leadership, such as, for example, Rosemont Seneca Investment Foundation, previously headed by Hunter Biden. And we would like to call upon the United States Congress to initiate an investigation into the American biological programs and also to conduct the official interrogation of all persons involved. In conclusion, I would like to give you one more example when the United States failed to fulfill its obligation under the convention. We're talking about the confidence-building measures that the state parties to the convention are obliged to submit to the United Nations in order to control the implementation of the BTWC. Since 2016, the moment when the implementation of the mentioned project has started, the United States and Ukraine are covering them intentionally by not including them in the international reports, despite their obvious military biological nature. These reports have no information about the funding of the Ukrainian laboratories by the United States military. Such secrecy is another reason for us to think about the true goals of the Pentagon in Ukraine. In the context of incoming information, we consider it necessary to seek clarification from Washington regarding the true goals of the activities of American biological labs, including in the course of the international investigation under Articles 5 and 6 of the Convention on the Prohibition of Biological and Toxin Weapons. Thank you for your attention.
I think we can thank General Kirillov. You may notice that a big part of what he was saying pertaining to Ukraine was already reflected in the documents that we circulated as official documents of the Security Council recently. Now I would like to give the floor to our second briefer, Ms. Dilyana Gaitandzhieva. Dilyana, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. A nuclear war is the existential threat facing humanity today. There are weapons, however, which have a greater killing capacity than nuclear weapons if used under optimal conditions. Just 1 gram of botulinum toxin by the inhalation of root can kill as many as 1 million people. 2 grams of the lethal toxin equal a 1 megaton nuclear bomb. The detonation of a 1 megaton hydrogen bomb in a major urban area could result in between 500,000 and 1.9 million deaths. While there are international organizations such as OPCW and the International Atomic Energy Agency, which investigate violations related to chemical and nuclear weapons, there is no such an organization dealing with biological weapons. Nobody is checking for violations of the Bioweapons Convention. There is no such mechanism because the United States has objected and blocked the verification of the convention for 20 years. Instead, the U.S. Department of State, Department of Defense, has funded biolaboratories in 25 countries across the world, many of which are strategically located around the U.S. main rivals, Russia and China. I have investigated the activities of one of these biolaboratories, the Luga Center in Tbilisi, the Republic of Georgia. I filmed on camera the testimonies of local people who had witnessed death cases related to this biolaboratory. I would like to play a short video from my documentary on the Luga Center in Georgia.
The Lugar Center is a Pentagon biolaboratory in Georgia's capital, Tbilisi. It's located just 17 kilometers from the U.S. Veziani military airbase. The military biolaboratory is heavily guarded. All passers-by within a radius of 100 meters are being filmed, although the military biolaboratory is located in a residential area. These U.S. biolaboratories are funded by the Defense Threat Reduction Agency under a $2.1 billion military program, known as the Cooperative Biological Engagement Program, and are located in former Soviet countries such as Georgia and the Ukraine, but also in the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Africa. Local residents from the Alexeivka neighborhood, where the laboratory is located, are not willing to talk on camera. Only a few of them are not afraid to speak up.
Реально, моя голова болит. Иногда вот когда выпускают вот это все, ветер обычно оттуда на нас идет. Вот запах тухлых яиц бывает, это что-то. Иногда вот такой, знаете, вот фиолетовый цвет выходит, иногда какой-то... Я один раз ночью, говорю, проснулся, утром уже светалось. Смотрю оттуда, я оделся, подошел, ночью дым выпускают. От кого вы прячете?
Тоже были случаи с филиппинцами. Они на квартире жили в 44-м корпусе. Лабораторию, когда еще совсем не достроили. Был несчастный случай.
Какой случай?
Сейчас умерли люди, филиппинцы, вот эти двое. Двоих куда увезли, куда еще 4 их было. Ну, кто его знает, как случилось. Что-то они там работали, видимо, отравились чем-то, каким-то газом.
Скажи, как вот эти вот отравились, эти филиппинцы, все...
Мои соседи, филиппинцы, на площадке жили. Один раз отравились они, позвали, нас попросили позвать скорую помощь, мы вызвали. Оклемали, сказали, вроде бы от рыбы отравились. А второй раз стучали, тоже просили о помощи. Там жило 4 филиппинца, 2 из них их откачали, а 2 умерли. Это то, что мои глаза видели.
Вызвали, у них пена с рта шла, один кричал help me, кричал все, а потом, когда умер, скоро увезли, и все это скрыли. Все. Вот здесь все это.
И даже сдохли. Вот когда
Даже
вот этот
ужас.
они, да. Вот там, знаете, большую трубу они вложили вот под землей, и они канализационные свои трубы подсоединили с этой большой трубой. И, видимо, оттуда вот этот вонь, запах идет. Запах, знаете, вот яйцо, протухшего яйца и сено, когда вот гниет, вот такой запах идет. И ветер разносит в разные стороны.
Вот эта вот улица идет, вот здесь вот закопали вот такие вот трубы, синие такие трубы пластмассовые. И идет там Пура, наша река, там 3, 4, 5 километров, и от этого все туда сливается. Они не только воздух наш травят, но и воду тоже травят. Вот эту вот. Здесь живут мои внуки, там внизу. Они моих внуков травят. Вот там вот. Вот по этой вот улице.
Local residents are worried about what chemicals are being burnt secretly at night and what waste is being emptied into the river and causes the smell of rotten eggs in the residential area around the laboratory.
Воздух травят нас, он туда на нас идет. Вон труба, видите? И все закрыто, охрана все. А чего вы боитесь? Если у вас все нормально, почему вы боитесь? Я помню, один раз лично из 4 труб одновременно дым шел днем, а потом днем перестали. Выпускают все это ночью, чтобы люди не видели.
Ой, вы знаете, как плохо. Так эти запахи идут, специфические запахи вообще нас. Иногда так мучают, беспокоит ночью особенно. И потом еще после дождя тоже эти запахи вообще нас очень мучают.
А
Кто у кого, кто спрашивает, мои хорошие, кто нас спрашивает, мы маленький народ.
Leaked documents reveal that the U.S. Embassy in Tbilisi transports pathogens, as well as frozen human blood samples, as diplomatic cargo. The American diplomats claim the human blood is needed for research purposes in connection with an American program on hepatitis C in Georgia. Tasked with the program are biologists from the U.S. Army Medical Research Unit Georgia, along with private American contractors and the U.S. Center for Disease Control. Certain zones of the laboratory are classified zones and are accessible only to American citizens with security clearance. They are accorded diplomatic immunity under the 2002 U.S.-Georgia Agreement on Defense Cooperation. Joshua Bast is Deputy Director of the U.S. Army Medical Research Unit Georgia. The American military scientist drives a diplomatic car and enjoys diplomatic immunity without being a diplomat.
You are here because we saw this last day and you're here again, so you're working here. You're from the U.S. Embassy. What are you doing here during this center? Are you a scientist? You're a scientist?
Joshua Bast is an entomologist and researches insects, according to a video released by the U.S. Embassy to promote the peaceful purposes of the otherwise military program of the U.S. in Georgia. Why does an entomologist work for the U.S. Army, and why is he accorded with diplomatic immunity? Entomological warfare is a type of biological warfare that uses insects to transmit diseases. Georgia borders on the U.S. main rival, Russia. Moscow has repeatedly voiced concerns about the potential development of biological weapons near Russian borders, including the spread of diseases through insects. Such fears are not groundless, considering a recent U.S. patent for a toxic mosquito aerial release system granted by the United States Patent and Trademark Office in 2014. The invention includes a drone that can release infected mosquitoes. According to the patent documents, it is capable of delivering lethal and non-lethal toxins, including an agent that can be carried and administered by a mosquito. The inventor of the drone for releasing the toxic mosquitoes, S. Mill Calvert, has patented 42 similar military inventions for the U.S. Army and Special Forces, including stroke-inducing bullets in a span of just 2 years from 2013 to 2015. A person with such a name, however, does not exist in the U.S. Citizens Registry. The U.S. patent lawyer, Louis Ventre, who filed the application, declined to comment on if the name was a pseudonym and who his client actually was. Documents show a number of Pentagon projects involving insects as possible vectors of diseases in Georgia. In 2014, the Lugar Center was equipped with an insect facility and launched a project on sandflies in Georgia and the Caucasus. In In 2014 to 2015, sandfly species were collected under another project, Surveillance Work on Acute Febrile Illness, and all female sandflies were tested to determine their infectivity rate. A third project, including sandflies collection, studied the characteristics of their salivary glands.
I have really a very serious concerns that nobody in the government in reality knows what is going on inside. Because as I know, in general, in some places, because there are some, as I understand, there are some different levels inside of this object. There are some levels where Georgians have an access and they are working, but there are some levels where Georgians have no access. And of course, it's not normal when there is some serious object in your country where citizens of your country have no access.
21,590 ticks were collected for DNA databasing for future studies at the Lugar Center under the Pentagon project Genetic Diversity of Crimean Congo Hemorrhagic Fever Virus and Hantaviruses in Georgia. The Pentagon projects involving ticks coincide with an inexplicable outbreak of Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever, which is caused by infection through a tick-borne virus. In 2014 alone, 34 people became infected, along with a 4-year-old child, 4 of which died. A total of 60 cases and 9 fatalities have been registered in Georgia since 2009, according to leaked emails between Lugar Center Director Amaran Gamkrelidze and Minister of Health of Georgia, David Serchenko. These worrying statistics have been hidden from the public.
Hidden from the public for years were also the Pentagon-funded biolaboratories in Ukraine. U.S. Undersecretary of State Victoria Nuland confirmed their existence. She also admitted the United States is worried that those biological research materials may fall into the Russian hands. If those research materials were simple viruses, bacteria, and toxins, then why are U.S. officials so worried that they may fall into the Russian hands? I would like to show you the map of Ukraine where these biolaboratories are located, and documents showing how much money was spent on 12 of these biolaboratories. All these documents that I'm showing now originate from the US Embassy in Kiev. This document is the agreement between the United States Department of Defense and the Ministry of Health of Ukraine, which regulates the activity of the Pentagon under this program. According to this agreement, Ukraine is obliged to transfer to the Pentagon dangerous pathogens for biological research. Certain information related to the program is sensitive information. The Ukrainian government is prohibited from public disclosure of sensitive information about the program. This is the reason why the results of some of these projects were never made public, like the following projects that I want to present now to your attention. The Pentagon has conducted biological experiments on 4,400 soldiers in Ukraine and 1,000 soldiers in Georgia. According to leaked documents, all volunteer deaths will be promptly reported. The Defense Threat Reduction Agency has launched a 5-year-long project with a possible extension of up to 3 years, codenamed GG21, arthropod-borne and zoonotic infections among military personnel in Georgia. According to the project's description, blood samples will be obtained from 1,000 military recruits at the time of their military registration physical exam at the Georgian Military Hospital located in Gori. The samples will be tested for antibodies against 14 pathogens. The amount of blood draw will be 10 milliliters. Samples will be stored indefinitely at the Luga Center or the U.S. Army Medical Research Unit, Georgia, and might be sent to the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research headquarters in the United States for future studies. This is the largest biomedical research facility administered by the Pentagon. The results of the blood testing will not be provided to the study participants. According to the project report, quote, all volunteer deaths will be promptly reported. The Defense Threat Reduction Agency has funded a similar project involving soldiers, UP8, the spread of Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever virus and Hantaviruses in Ukraine, as was already mentioned in the presentation of the Russian Ministry of Defense. The project started in 2017 and was extended a few times until 2020. 4,000 of these samples taken from soldiers will be tested for antibodies against hantaviruses and 400 of them for the presence of antibodies against Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever virus. The results of the blood testing will not be provided to the study participants. There is no information as to what other procedures will be performed, except that serious incidents, including deaths, should be reported within 24 hours. All deaths of study subjects that are suspected or known to be related to the research procedures should be brought to the attention of the bioethics committees in the United States and Ukraine. This is what is written in the documents about this project. Documents also reveal that the Bioethics Committee of Ukraine recommended that the study participant be informed about the unknown health risks which the project UP8 involves. According to the Bioethics Committee of Ukraine, a particular treatment or procedure under this project may have risks to the participants which are unknown at the time of signing the informed consent. This is the exact quotation from the documents that I'm presenting now. The Defense Threat Reduction Agency activities in Georgia and Ukraine fall under the protection of special bilateral agreements. If Defense Threat Reduction Agency sponsored scientist causes death or injuries to the local population, they cannot be held to account. According to the umbrella agreement between Georgia and the United States, Georgia shall hold harmless and indemnify the United States of America and its personnel, contractors, and contractors' personnel for damage, death, or injury to any person in Georgia arising out of activities under this agreement. There is a similar agreement signed between Ukraine and the United States, which states Ukraine shall hold harmless and bring no legal proceedings against the United States and personnel, contractors, and contractors' personnel of the United States for death or injury to any person of Ukraine arising out of activities related to work under this agreement. In addition, claims by third parties for deaths, injuries, etc., arising out of the acts of omissions of any employees of the United States related to work under this agreement shall be the responsibility of Ukraine. The Defense Threat Reduction Agency allocated $80 million for biological research in Ukraine as of July 2020. And the company Black and Veatch Special Projects was tasked with the program. Black and Veatch Special Projects Corporation and its subcontractors were given full access to freely operate in all biolabs in Ukraine that were engaged in biological research activities under the Defense Threat Reduction Agency program, according to a letter dated the 2nd of July 2019 from the Ukrainian Minister of Health, Uliana Suprun, to the Defense Threat Reduction Agency in Ukraine. Uliana Suprun is an American national and was conferred Ukrainian citizenship by former President Petro Poroshenko in 2015. While these Pentagon contractors were given full access to all biolabs involved in the Defense Threat Reduction Agency program, independent experts were denied such access. The Ministry of Health of Ukraine rejected the proposal made by the scientific journal Problems of Innovation and Investment Development and did not allow independent public control group of experts to supervise these biolaboratories. The Ministry of Health of Ukraine considers it inappropriate to create a working group for public control, and it is not possible to allow members of the group to enter the premises of laboratories of especially dangerous infections of the Ministry of Health of Ukraine. This is what is written in a letter dated October 2016 from the Ukrainian Deputy Minister Oksana Sivak to the Scientific Journal. This document speaks volumes, and they show that the Ukrainian side didn't want to open these biolaboratories for public control. The question is why, and what is the reason? I think all these projects and documents that we are presenting now to your attention give the answer. In addition, I would like to show another very worrying project. The United States and the Pentagon has been collecting specifically Russian RNA and synovial tissue samples, raising fears in Moscow of a covert US ethnic bioweapons program. The Pentagon wanted to buy human fresh frozen synovial tissue and human RNA samples that must be Russian Caucasian origin. One of the prospective suppliers asked, would you consider samples from Ukraine? The answer was no. All samples, synovial tissue and RNA samples, shall be collected from Russia and must be Caucasian. The government will not consider tissue samples from Ukraine. All these documents and evidence raise the question whether the United States was preparing a biowarfare attack on Russia via Ukraine. The Russian Defense Ministry announced that Russia has already taken under control 5 out of 30 of these biolaboratories. However, there are such biolaboratories in 25 countries across the world working under the Pentagon program, and they pose a threat to all of us. Article 8 of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court defines biological experiments as war crimes. The United States, however, is not a state party to the international treaty. US government officials and media have repeatedly dismissed all these revelations as a conspiracy theory simply because the president's son, Hunter Biden, is linked to the company Metabiota, which has worked in biolaboratories in Ukraine, but also in Georgia, in China, and in Sierra Leone before and during the Ebola outbreak in Africa. No one is above the law. I believe all these documents and evidence will be taken into consideration and a thorough and fair investigation will be launched. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dilyana. Indeed, quite worrying information for us, and I think that for everybody who is following this issue. And thank you very much for your very insightful presentation. It really sheds the light on dangers that military biological activity may pose. I specifically am grateful for touching upon many important aspects, in particular the need for transparency and verification with regard to biological activities. I hope members of the Security Council will support and echo your appeal to put such activity under strict international control within the BWC framework. And please stay with us. I hope that members of the Security Council and our guests will have questions for you to answer. Now I'd like to give the floor to our third briefer, Mr. Arkady Mamontov. Arkady, you have the floor.
Good day. Thanks for having me. I've listened to the report of my colleague. It is quite exhaustive. It has a lot of information about the activities of the US biolabs, including in Ukraine. So here's what I'd like to say. Being outside of the door of US biolabs that have these secret experiments is something that is quite difficult. A year and a half ago, we were investigating and we were making a documentary on COVID-19 origins. And many believe that it is of artificial nature. And since we asked and interrogated many people, and since we gathered information worldwide, thanks to our American colleagues, independent journalists, we were able to talk to and to exchange information with people who, back in the day, worked in these closed biolabs, as they were US military biologists. Part of this information that I have can be presented to you. But you know, it will not be complete because due to the current situation, I'm afraid about what happened with these people who provided this information. This was prior to the conflict, but now they could be charged with anything, with treason, for instance. Nevertheless, let us try. I will just read out something. One of our journalists was investigating the development of models of aerosol tests of pathogens. They were to be used in various parts of the globe. And this confirms what my colleague Delana said, that the US is considering using drones that carry infected mosquitoes, mosquitoes that are infected with fevers and other types of agents in order to infect the regions of Russia. So the thing is that this kind of activity is taking place in Rager storage facility that's 20 kilometers close to Baltimore. It started in 2017, and they tested these agents on human beings. Next thing. All strains that the US biolabs get in the territory of the US are received through the CIA, and the CIA carries them from various parts of the globe, from Latin America, from Georgia, from Ukraine. The biggest number of strains was delivered from Ukraine. And here's what our journalists tell us. We have a similar report to the one that was presented by our colleague, but I would like to just quote some topical information that we received not so long time ago. How the US biolabs are working. They use commercial biolabs that are located in colleges and universities and educational facilities. They train young experts, young scientists, and Pentagon believes that they are useful. Pentagon recruits them, they provide them clearance, and later on, they give them jobs to laboratories, for instance, in Ukraine. Just a minute. And another piece of information. Naturally, American military biologists who told us about the whole process of researching the biological materials in biolabs in Georgia and Ukraine. This is all carried out under the pretext of caring for the protection against biological threats. But actually, this is all made by the CIA. And I quote, the CIA doesn't care about military hostilities. They have one goal in mind, that's to undermine the economy. They're not controlled by anyone. And I am aware about a number of their illegal actions and projects promoted within the Center for Neutralization of Bio Threats, including the development of hybrid viruses, for instance, the hybrid Ebola and Anthrax virus. And the major part of this research is taking place in West Jefferson facility in the Ohio state. They created a biolab where they conducted experiments with anthrax. This is quite a specific piece of information. And if colleagues draw attention to this information, and if they ask comments on these pretty specific information, that would be good. I would like to cite names. During the work within the research center, we met Eugene Johnston, that's the senior research, and we found this Eugene Johnson. Just a second. Just a second. So, Dr. Eugene Johnson is an American virologist, an expert on Ebola and Marburg virus. He previously worked in the US Army Institute, and currently he's working in medical research facility of the armed forces. And this very person visited Ukraine a couple of times, where he conducted research in biological warfare. What else? What else? Just a second. Here's the thing. Another important piece of information regarding oncology. American microbiologists who dared to talk to us told us that there is some active research in the US when it comes to infecting with cancer of unfavored leaders, and we asked them about Hugo Chavez, who had cancer and who died of cancer, and one of the journalists confirmed that this could indeed happen. And here's what he has to say. According to some research of the National Oncology Research Institute in Fort Detrick, and Fort Detrick is the focal point of various research in the US regarding the coronavirus and other dangerous pathogens, and Fort Detrick is under control of the Defense Department and Pentagon. So back in the day, this institution investigated the anthrax virus, and they wanted to make a biological weapon out of it. And President Nixon closed this facility. But later on, it opened up once again, and thus we see that scientists are migrating from one institution to another, as well as the funding. There are a lot of research carried out in this very institution in Fort Detrick. So the National Cancer Institute was conducting various agents as force, and according to this research, animals got cancer In aerosol form, these agents were dispersed and they could have been used in Latin America in order to get rid of people that the US deem unfavored. And this cannot be confined to Chavez. Maybe some of the leaders are resistant to such kind of viruses. So this information is something that you can trust or not, but it is something that exists. Why did I decide to make this information public? Well, I don't have very specific documents, but this is an underground information that should be checked and tested. We believe that in Ukraine, in the past, and maybe even now, the US conducted the research of not only dangerous pathogens that remained in laboratories after the Soviet Union. I'm talking about cholera and anthrax, that they want just to help the Ukrainian people. But actually, we believe that Ukraine is a test field for them when it comes to developing biological warfare. It's not clear why this research is not taking place in Mexico or in Canada close to their borders, but they're conducting this research 8,000 kilometers away, close to the territory of Russia, and they use Ukrainians as guinea pigs. My colleague said already that there were people dying in Georgia and there were cases in Ukraine when some unexplained outbreak of mass infections happened and people died. Some time ago, Madame Suprun, who was called the death doctor, she was appointed as the health minister, and the first thing she does is destroy the sanitary system of the Soviet times. It existed and it saved lives of people, vaccines and annual testing and checkups. It was all destroyed. And after that, this measles vaccine was introduced. And soon after that, there was an outbreak, the measles outbreak. And we believe that that was an artificial outbreak. Apparently, US scientists just tested some of the vaccines and they were studying how Slavic people, how Ukrainians were responding to these vaccines. And another thing that I would like to share with you, that's what we got from our US friends. So I have one thing that I would like to share with you. There's one dangerous disease as brucellosis. It is not lethal, but it has an impact that emerges in a couple of days' time. And it is not reasonable to use it during the warfare, but if it is infecting people that are not taking part in hostilities, this has a lot of strain on hospitals. And naturally, it could be a strategic biological weapon, and the use and repercussions of this infection is quite dangerous. And another thing I would like to say, in a medical lab of the army in North Virginia, there's another lab that is directly developing biological weapons. And of course, if there was a freedom of speech, these questions could be asked could be posed to the US microbiologist, and an investigation could be carried out, and people who are in charge of this could be investigated in the Senate committee, as well as within the United Nations. We suppose that we're talking about a strong, powerful system of secret biolabs of the US that is not only in charge of biological security, but that are developing various dangerous biological agents that could be used as weapons.
For example, I would also like to highlight that during the presidency of Clinton, CIA, and then under Bush the Senior, considered the construction of laboratories, and in violation of all the norms, they established a lab in the state of Utah. It was a small test field where they produced anthrax virus because they alleged that the Soviet Union had such laboratories. So they had anthrax that they wanted to use in military purposes. De facto, they used a strain that is worked on in vat laboratories all over the world. And they also involved antigens to anthrax. So that was a strain of Ames, and such a method of biological testing is used in every vat lab all over the world because it's a standardized protocol of checking up the cattle before killing it or transporting it. Though it was concealed work of creating biological weapons in the violation of all the conventions. And the last thing that I would like to say is surnames of those people who, according to us, have something to do with the creation of biological weapons. For example, Luther Linder was the head of the Center of Analyzing Biological Threat, George Korch. Eugene Jones, who I have already mentioned. He used to be the head microbiologist of the CIA, so-called Eric Henshaw, the director of diagnostics in the Army Institution of the Analysis of Threats. Louisa Pitt, director of the Department of Air Biology of the same institution. For example, in the laboratory in Lima several years ago, on the basis of the research laboratory of the Marshall Forces of the United States, there were analyses of brucellosis and people who were contaminated with that. But no one says publicly how they got this brucellosis. I'm apologizing for my statement not to be that structured, but I just didn't want to repeat the same information that my colleagues had already outlined. I wanted to share with you the information that we have received from unofficial sources, and we perhaps would like the UN Commission on Biological Weapons to pay attention to that, and we are ready to share our materials for you to take a look at them, to analyze them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arkady. You see that both our journalists are very devoted persons, and it was a very hard time for us to limit their presentation into some reasonable limit of time. I think there was a very nice suggestion in the presentation of Arkady. I had the idea, why wouldn't we propose our colleagues from Mexico, for example, or France or Norway to host some of US biolabs on their territory. That would save a lot of space for our American colleagues to conduct their research. They say it's a good thing. They say it's good, and this is employment. So why don't you consider this, guys? I wouldn't, of course, having heard all this presentation, but we don't have, unfortunately, our US and British colleagues here in this hall, which is also very much suspicious and illustrative of their attitude towards this problem, which is a serious one. So, Arkady, thank you once again. Thank you for the testimonies of the eyewitnesses. We understand that you can't disclose the names in the current geopolitical context. I also, before I give the floor to council members, I would like to draw your attention that all the materials presented by our briefers today are available through the QR code in front of you. They include a set of documents, documented evidence by our Ministry of Defense, as well as full versions of the documentary produced by Dilyana and documentary by Arkady. So we decided not to show them to save our time. Now I open the floor to the council members who wish to make statements in the order they inscribed to the list of speakers. I would encourage you to limit the interventions to 5 minutes. The first on my list is Ambassador Dai Bing, China. Please, Dai.
Mr. Chair, I thank you for convening this meeting. I also thank the briefers for the important information which I listened carefully. China has suffered from the biological weapons during the Second World War, and thus consistently stands for the complete prohibition and thorough destruction of all weapons of mass destruction, including biological and chemical weapons. China firmly opposes the development, stockpiling, or use of biological and chemical weapons by any country under any circumstances, and urges countries that have not done so to destroy their chemical weapons stockpiles as soon as possible. All states parties should comply with the objectives and principles of the BWC in good faith. This Sunday marks the 50th anniversary of the opening for signature of the BWC. The current dynamics on biological security highlights the urgent need to relaunch negotiations on the verification protocol under the BWC and establish a professional, impartial, and independent multilateral verification mechanism based on that. Such a mechanism is a necessary but long absent instrument to eliminate potential biological weapons threats and enhance the authority and effectiveness of the BWC, and its establishment must not be thwarted by any certain member state. Mr. Chair, recently the Russia Federation has published a quite number of documents related to biological military activities of the United States, which has caused great concern of the international community. The COVID-19 pandemic has reminded us that as a crucial matter of the international peace and security, biological security has no borders and involves shared interests of the humanity. Thus, any information and lead on biological military activities should trigger heightened concern and attention of the international community to avoid irreparable harm. China welcomes the international community to assess the discovered documents within appropriate frameworks, including the BWC and the UN. And here, the clarifications from the relevant country in a fair and impartial manner. In this regard, the relevant country should take a responsible approach and offer timely and comprehensive clarifications on its biological activities to remove the doubts of the international community. Further enhancement of the transparency on these global biological activities is also needed. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, dear Bing. Next on my list is Brazil, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me start by thanking Russia for organizing this Arria-formula. I thank our briefers for the wealth of information provided. And I also acknowledge the usefulness of making this information available through the QR codes provided. Mr. President, although in a different format, this is the third time in a month that Council meeting has been convened to address serious allegations regarding development, production, and stockpiling of biological weapons. Simultaneously, this issue is also being raised in Geneva, where our colleagues are meeting for the second preparatory committee for the 9th review conference of the Biological Weapons Convention. As my delegation stated on previous occasions, Brazil believes that allegations of such gravity must be thoroughly substantiated by solid evidence, which must be presented and confirmed by an independent and impartial authority, as foreseen in Article 6 of the BWC. 50 years after having adopted the BWC, which was, and I quote, determined for the sake of all humankind to exclude completely the possibility of biological agents and toxins being used as weapons, end of quote, we still haven't been able to agree on a multilateral mechanism to verify compliance with the provisions of the Convention. The absence of such mechanism hobbles the transparency of international biosafety and biosecurity research initiatives, as the international community has no effective means to discern between legitimate scientific and technological cooperation and possible violations of the prohibition against the development of the production of biological weapons. Against this backdrop, Brazil favors the resumption of negotiations with a view to the adoption of a binding verification protocol that strengthens the implementation of the Convention and contributes to building trust among states parties regarding the exclusively peaceful use of knowledge and technology in the field of life sciences. The next WC RevCon represents a unique opportunity for us to re-engage in such discussions without delay. While such a protocol is not adopted, we invite state parties to strengthen the confidence-building measures system established in the Convention Second Review Conference by sharing the widest possible range of information regarding research projects on topics related to the object of the Convention within and outside their territory. Finally, Mr. President, I would like to take this opportunity to reiterate that Brazil condemns, in the strongest possible terms, the use or threat of use of all weapons of mass destruction, including biological weapons, anywhere, by anyone, under any circumstances. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Norway.
Thank you. Yet again, we are witnessing the Russian Federation's misuse of the United Nations and its privileged position within it as platform for disinformation and as a smokescreen to draw attention away from the brutal warfare it is waging against the Ukrainian people. The intensity of this disinformation campaign is alarming. Colleagues, Norway is a firm supporter of the Biological Weapons Convention, and we are determined, together with partners in the international community, to uphold a total ban against biological weapons. Let me therefore be clear that we consider allegations of violations of the BWC to be extremely serious and merit scrutiny. Yet, Russia has failed to offer any credible evidence for its accusations, providing us instead with unsubstantiated claims and mere insinuations. The offered documentation simply does not support the assertions. As we repeatedly heard from the UN High Representative for Disarmament Affairs in the Security Council last month, the United Nations is not aware of any biological weapons program in Ukraine. It is quite clear that today's meeting is nothing but another attempt to spread confusion and deflect from Russia's role as aggressor in the illegal invasion of Ukraine. Russia's war against Ukraine is a blatant violation of international law and the very principles of the United Nations Charter. We are appalled by reports of unimaginable atrocities in Ukraine, in areas that have been held by Russian forces. Norway strongly condemns attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure. We call for accountability for all violations of international law, and we echo the call by the Secretary General for an independent investigation. We cannot allow impunity for war crimes being committed in Ukraine. Colleagues, let me end by reiterating that Norway condemns in the strongest terms Russia's war against Ukraine. We demand Russia halt the fighting, withdraw its troops, and stop causing further death, suffering, and destruction. Thank you.
Thank you, Norway, for not listening to our presentation and turning deaf ear to all the proofs that we provide. Franz, will you do the same, please?
Thank you. I will be brief. We regret that Russia is once again using the United Nations as a platform for disinformation. The repeated spread by Russia at the highest level of false information about biological weapons is irresponsible. Unfortunately, Russia has a clear track record on this. As early as 2011, Russia accused Georgia of developing a biological weapons program without any evidence. Russia then refused to take part in the peer review visit organized in response by Georgia, leaving no doubt as to the fact that those accusations were baseless. Today, Russia claims that it is Ukraine that is developing an offensive biological program. The United Nations, however, clearly indicated that they were not aware of any such program. For years, Russia has been mounting a smear campaign against the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. And we know too well that it has done so to protect its Syrian ally and to cover up its own chemical attacks on European soil. Therefore, no one should be fooled by Russia's objective here today. The Russian narrative is dangerous, and it is especially worrying because Russia is a depository state of the Biological Weapons Convention. As we approach the 9th Review Conference of the BWC, we must not give in to these baseless provocations. We must focus all our efforts on safeguarding and implementing the convention so that these shocking weapons are never used again in the future. I thank you.
Thank you, Franz. Just for the record, we didn't accuse Ukraine of developing biological weapons. We think that they're being used as guinea pigs, like in Georgia. And there were accounts of people from Georgia who visited, I think, this plant and living near this plant that you mentioned. As for the proofs, since Norway and Georgia and France is asking us, maybe next time we'll bring some contaminated bats or ticks, I don't know, to show you the proof, or blood samples. Maybe that will work. I don't know. Okay, next on my list is Ghana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me begin by thanking the Russian Federation for convening this Arria-formula meeting and the briefers for their insightful perspectives on the subject. Mr. Chair, as a state party to the Biological Weapons Convention, Ghana acknowledges the convention as a key element in the international community's efforts to address the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, given that it is the first multilateral disarmament treaty banning an entire category of WMDs. We have taken due and careful note of the briefings. We believe that the United Nations has a responsibility to secure humanity and future generations from the scourge of weapons of mass destruction, including chemical and biological weapons. Recent global developments, especially the COVID-19 pandemic, is proof that diseases would not confine themselves to national borders and could easily spread rapidly around the world and lead to staggering amounts of deaths. Mr. Chair, military biological activities, if they exist, are an issue of grave international concern. This is because by the Biological Weapons Convention, member states are supposed to move away from the use of biological agents as instruments of war. We therefore reiterate our long-standing view that experimentation of biological agents is inhumane and should never be even considered. Mr. Chair, we believe that the call for a verification regime for the BWC is valid and that such an addition could be done in a manner that is reasonable and sensible. We see the need for a verification protocol that would establish an independent mechanism that brings under its purview all competent public and private biological research institutions and draws out different and necessary expertise within the various international organizations, such as the World Organization for Animal Health, the World Health Organization, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and the United Nations Environmental Programme, among others. Mr. Chair, chemical and biological warfare agents constitutes a low probability but high impact risk to both the perpetrators and the rest of the world and pose a difficult public health challenge that will be difficult to contain. Military programs aimed at developing biological weapons should not be encouraged. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. India.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This meeting here is taking place while the BWC is holding a preparatory committee meeting in Geneva towards the 5-yearly review conference later this year. I think this matter is also being discussed and it is expected to come up in the meeting. India attaches high importance to the BWC as a key global and non-discriminatory disarmament convention prohibiting an entire category of weapons of mass destruction. It is important to ensure full and effective implementation of the BWC in its letter and spirit. We also believe that all matters relating to the obligations under the BWC should be addressed as per the provisions of the convention through consultations and cooperation between the parties concerned. We continue to emphasize that the global order is anchored on international law, the UN Charter, the full and effective implementation of all multilateral treaties by the states parties, and respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty of states. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Mexico.
Chairman, Mexico categorically opposes the use of biological weapons by any actor under any circumstances. This is in line with my country's long-standing conviction against all weapons of mass destruction. Mexico is therefore committed to the full compliance with the Convention on the Prohibition of the Development, Production, and Stockpiling of Bacteriological and Toxin Weapons and on their destruction. This is a fundamental treaty of the United Nations disarmament regime, and in the event of any disputes, this must be dealt through the mechanisms established by the Convention itself, since there is no verification mechanism such as in the case of chemical weapons. We thus recall that Article 5 of the Convention clearly stipulates that the states parties undertake to consult and cooperate with one another in solving any controversies which may arise in relation to the objective of the Convention or in the application of its provisions, and that consultations and cooperation may also be undertaken through appropriate international procedures within the framework of the United Nations and in accordance with its charter. The submission of annual reports is also an important confidence-building measure, which could allow for further clarification of issues before they could become potential controversies. It is regrettable that the Convention still does not have a verification mechanism. We sincerely hope that the review conference will serve as a framework to advance effective ways of strengthening the regime on the prohibition of biological weapons and the capacities of the international community in light of current international peace and security affairs. Mr. Chairman, Mexico is a firm supporter of safeguarding the peaceful uses of bioresearch with raising awareness of and tackling the risks of proliferation derived from dual-use materials. We know firsthand of the importance of research in this field. My country reports on its BSL-3 facilities, which are only destined for diagnosis and research. We also adhere to the most prominent export control regimes, including the Australia Group, which is aimed at ensuring that exports do not contribute to the development of chemical or biological weapons. This is why we strongly believe in promoting all synergies between the BWC, export control regimes, the World Health Organization, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and the World Organization for Animal Health to develop comprehensive and coherent public policies. Mr. Chairman, insofar the attention on new risks relating to bioweapons has grown since the start of the pandemic, and with some of the allegations we have heard in the recent weeks, which the UN has stated that it does not possess information on, it is worth mentioning that all international mechanisms to prevent the proliferation of possible bioweapons to non-state actors should be strengthened. In this same vein of fostering synergies, we sincerely hope that aspects relating to biosecurity can be bolstered in the framework of the 1540 Committee, which Mexico currently chairs. The upcoming comprehensive review of Resolution 1540 is an excellent opportunity to advance on these aspects. I thank you.
Thank you, Mexico. I think you referred to, and some of our previous speakers referred to the fact that UN doesn't possess information on this as something that is questionable in relation to what we promote. But I think this is only proving that the United States has something to conceal, because otherwise the information would have been provided as they should do it. United Arab Emirates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the briefers. At the outset, I'd like to reiterate the UAE's long-standing position of support and commitment to the Biological Weapons Convention. Pursuant to the Convention, biological weapons must never be developed, produced, stockpiled, acquired, retained, or transferred. The use of biological weapons by anyone under any circumstances is illegal and an attack on our shared humanity. We recognize the importance of supporting and facilitating research related to the use of biological agents and toxins for peaceful purposes, including for the prevention of disease as contemplated by Article 10 of the Convention. We urge states to consult one another and to cooperate in resolving any issues that arise under the Convention. We encourage constructive consultations and good faith engagement in this regard, and stress that exchanging and publishing relevant information is an important measure to build trust. The UAE looks forward to engaging in the 9th Review Conference of the Biological Weapons Convention to be held this August in Geneva. The conference should help to ensure that the Convention remains a valuable tool to prevent the use of these illegal and horrific biological weapons. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Two more Russia condemning statements to follow. Ireland.
Chair, Ireland is a committed state party to the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention. The use of biological agents or toxins, or indeed chemicals, as instruments of war is immoral and illegal and would cause untold human suffering. They are rightly banned under international law, and there can be no impunity for those who use them. It is essential for all of us, collectively, to uphold the international legal norm against such abhorrent weapons. Ireland looks forward to the BWC Review Conference and will work with states parties to further strengthen this key international instrument. Chair, we are concerned, however, that this is not the reason Russia organised this meeting. Russia has repeatedly sought to mask the awful cost of its unprovoked war on Ukraine with baseless and unfounded claims against Ukraine and the United States. This is part of a longer track record of using disinformation in multilateral fora to try to mask its activities and to protect its allies. Russia should stop trying to use the Security Council, including the Arria format, as a platform for its disinformation campaign, to paint itself as the victim of its own aggression in the face of the heinous actions it has committed in Ukraine. Russia, through its disinformation campaigns and other actions, seeks to undermine essential multilateral disarmament and non-proliferation instruments upon which all of our security depends. This includes its ongoing and strident efforts to undermine bodies such as the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Russia's stance also risks undermining legitimate peaceful cooperation and research. These activities make it very difficult to support Russia's motivations for calling this meeting. Chair, what would be the most important today is for Russia to immediately cease its hostilities, unconditionally withdraw from the entire territory of Ukraine, and refrain from further threat or use of force of any kind against Ukraine. It is time that Russia took responsibility for its actions. Thank you.
And Albania.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It appears we have not reached the limit to the attempts to manipulate the Council, its voice, and the reality on the ground in Ukraine. It is deplorable that while Russia is ravaging Ukraine and brutalizing the Ukrainian people, wants to use the Council and the UN for its propaganda as a description of the reality of deadly ticks and flies. The images and footages from Bucha speak of a different reality. Russia is committing war crimes, yet Russia wants the Council to discuss their maneuvers at manufacturing a reality that presents their crimes as noble deeds, where deliberate killing of innocent people is considered as noble deed to defend the world from imaginary biological weapons or Nazism. Albania categorically rejects the injection of this Orwellian world by Russia. This is a behavior that is abhorrent and dangerous to our world community that depends on truth and shared norms. Mr. Chair, this meeting is a distraction from the cruelty and suffering inflicted by Russia on Ukraine. As in previous meetings, today's presentations are just that, a service to manufacture reality that comes straight from Pravda. There is no change to the basic facts: that the UN does not possess information on any biological weapons program in Ukraine, that Russia and Ukraine annual report to the Biological Weapons Convention have not identified any violation of the convention, that Council members have urged Russia to end its disinformation campaign and refrain from using Security Council as a platform to disseminate it, that Russian claims on chemical and biological weapons remain unverified, unsubstantiated, not independently assessed, and not supported by anyone in the scientific community. As we have stated before, there is a biological weapons convention that Russia can use if it wants to abide by international rules and procedures. Let's make use of it and bring clarity instead of smoke screens to cover up the crimes committed every hour by the Russian aggressor. In this regard, we call on Russia for an immediate ceasefire throughout Ukraine and withdrawal of all its military forces within the radius of 40 kilometers from suspected biological weapon sites. And finally, we demand that forces of UN secure 40-kilometer radius to allow diagnostic tracing teams to conduct investigation. Colleagues, this conflict at the heart of Europe will inevitably affect the multilateral system, and the fact that one of the permanent members of the Security Council is the aggressor represents an enormous challenge not only for the Council, but for the entire multilateral system to deal with major crises. We can only deal with such challenges by returning to our rule-based international order and by building a stronger international system for accountability. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Kenya?
Thank you, Chair. The human toll of the COVID-19 pandemic has illustrated our shared vulnerability to novel pathogens. It has also brought to the fore the need to strengthen the international tools against biological threats, whether natural, accidental, or deliberate in origin. The Convention on the Prohibition of the Development, Production, and Stockpiling of Bacteriological and Toxin Weapons and on their destruction, BWC, remains the global norm against biological weapons and the fundamental pillar of the international community's efforts to prevent development, production, and stockpiling and the use of such weapons. Mr. Chair, as a state party to PTWC, we reiterate the need for adherence to the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention and the need to strengthen it. Any allegations of the development of biological weapons in contravention of the Convention on the Prohibition of Development of these weapons must not be taken lightly, but should be addressed in line with the Convention. In this regard, we urge its 183 states parties to seize the opportunity of the 9th Review Conference later this year to strengthen the biological weapons regime and the norms that safeguard humanity from the threat and use of these abhorrent weapons. In conclusion, Mr. Chair, Kenya reiterates the call to all member states to make use of the Convention and its established mechanism to ensure that there is no ambiguity on the threat posed by these extremely dangerous weapons. Thank you.
Thank you very much. From the UN member states, I have 2 countries that wanted to speak. In case there are some other countries, please indicate it at the end of our meeting. So Belarus, please.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, Belarus attaches great importance to the Convention on the Prohibition of the Development, Production, and Stockpiling of Bacteriological, Biological, and Toxin Weapons on their destruction, as one of the pillars of the international security architecture. Now, as in 1975, its objectives are still relevant: to completely eliminate the possibility of using biological agents as weapons. The effects from the use of such deadly biological agents or toxins could be irreversible and deadly. Apart from numerous victims, such acts could also cause widespread devastation, hunger, ecological disasters, economic collapse. The Republic of Belarus is a responsible party to the Convention. We do not have such weapons and facilities for their production on the territory of our country. We consistently emphasize the need to comply with and to strengthen the BTWC, including through the institutionalization and adoption of a legally binding protocol to the Convention, which will provide, among other things, an effective mechanism for verifying compliance with the BTWC, as well as regular consultations and cooperation in resolving any issues arising from the implementation of the Convention. Belarus regrets that over the past 20 years, the BTWC state parties, contrary to the wishes of many stakeholders, have not been able to reach an agreement on the resumption of negotiations on the development of a protocol to the Convention, blocked by one state party in 2001. Given the substantial progress in certain areas of science and technology with dual-use potential, the risk of using biological agents as weapons increases every day. In our opinion, as practice shows, a mere reference to Article 6 of the Convention today is not sufficient to start an investigation of alleged breaches of the BTWC. We call on the BTWC state parties to continue their joint efforts leading to the strengthening of the Convention on a credible, legally binding basis. At the same time, we advocate the adoption of supporting measures aimed at improving the implementation of the Convention already at this stage. It is important to improve the confidence-building measures implemented within the framework of the BTWC by including information on the military biological activities of the state parties to the Convention abroad in the reporting form. We call on all state parties to take a constructive approach with regard to this proposal, which would undoubtedly contribute to the strengthening of the BTWC regime. As regards the immediate steps to address the current concerns of the state parties, including of the Russian Federation, the best option would be to provide a comprehensive clarification in a transparent manner. Belarus would continue following the development of the situation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Venezuela.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the outset, allow us to convey our appreciation to the delegation of the Russian Federation for convening this important and timely meeting to address in an open, inclusive, and transparent manner an issue that is both critical and incumbent on all of us. We also thank the briefers for their presentations. Mr. Chairman, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela is firmly committed with the purposes and principles enshrined in the UN Charter, particularly with its pledge of saving succeeding generations from the scourge of war. This is why we are deeply concerned at the threats to international peace and security resulting from military biological activities in regions across the world and their potential to further escalate tension amidst the current international juncture, which could ultimately and dangerously bring us closer to a point of no return with unimaginable consequences for humanity as a whole. Biological security has no borders. The Biological Weapons Convention, BWC, to which we are fully committed, is underpinned, as is the global non-proliferation and disarmament regime, on the principle of transparency, which is of utmost importance not only for fostering and building confidence among the states party to the convention, but also for ensuring that the public, private, and military sectors of states parties are not engaged in activities contrary to the provisions of the BWC, particularly those referred to in Article 1 of said convention. In this context, we seize this opportunity to express our serious concern and condemn in the strongest terms the potential use or threat of use of biological agents and toxins as an instrument of war and terror. Thus, we insist today on the urgent need of effective international action against biological threats and call for both the strengthening and improving the effectiveness and implementation of the BWC, including as a means of further advancing in the field of disarmament. Mr. Chairman, although we believe that the need to prevent harmful activities and to mitigate biological risks should never hamper scientific technical exchange or progress for peaceful purposes in such fields, or advancement in life-saving achievements like vaccine development, we are seriously concerned at recent reports of the existence of US-supported and/or controlled biolabs around the world, including in conflict zones. The inconsistencies in the information provided to date by various US officials with regards to such programs, far from providing clarifications, have just exacerbated our concerns and doubts about their intentions and objectives. Hence, considering the fact that we are currently living in a world marked by distrust, and that there have indeed been advances demonstrating the increasing sophistication of enabling technologies, which, although having positive benefits, also increase the potential for their use in a manner contrary to the provisions of the BWC, the conduction of such activities in a truly transparent manner should be a rule of thumb in order to increase confidence both in compliance with and among states parties to the Convention and to ensure the legitimacy of such activities. At present, though, there is still great uncertainty on the nature, scope, and potential impact on international peace and security of the multiple biolabs supported and/or controlled by the Department of Defense of the United States of America, including in Ukraine. For instance, we come from a region that has been declared a zone of peace since 2014. Nevertheless, there is at least one country in our region that has been engaged in an armed conflict for over 50 years and who also happens to be a global partner of NATO. Such a reality, coupled with the hostile policy of that very same nation towards Venezuela for the past 4 years, with the open support of the US government, begs the question about the possible existence or not of not officially recognized military biolabs supported and/or controlled by the US Department of Defense in its territory. And should that be the case, we would need crystal clear guarantees of their peaceful nature in the interest of regional security and stability. Mr. Chairman, in light of the foregoing, it would only be logical and useful for all of us to have a greater knowledge and clarity on this subject, which demonstrates the need for establishing an institutional mechanism within the framework of the BWC with clear procedures, mandates, and the technical capacity for conducting independent, neutral, and impartial assessments on the ground that could confirm whether or not pathogens, agents, or toxins have or are being developed to be used for hostile purposes on an armed conflict either in Ukraine or elsewhere. At last, we conclude on one hand by stressing the importance of ensuring the safety and security of these biolabs, while on the other, calling upon the United States to once and for all reconsider its policy in this field, which for over 20 years has prevented the Conference of States Parties to the BWC from advancing towards the development of a legally binding protocol, including on measures and provisions for verification. We make vows for concrete steps to be taken in that direction within the framework of the upcoming review conference later in August 2022, and for the US to engage constructively in multilateral negotiations in order to ensure that the legitimate and reasonable concerns of the wider international community are duly addressed. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Is there somebody else in the hall who wants to take the floor, some countries that we didn't mention? If so, please indicate your country and take the floor. I see nobody. Then I will ask our briefers to make very short concluding remarks and maybe comments. I would encourage you to limit them to 3-5 minutes maximum. Let's start from Arkady this time.
Sir, unmute your microphone, please.
Аркадий, ваш микрофон не выключен. Please unmute your mic. I think Arkady has some technical problems, so we'll come back to you. Dilyana, you have the floor now.
Извините, пожалуйста, да.
Sorry, Arkady is back.
Да. Еще раз благодарю за то, что вы позволили мне выступить на таком высоком собрании.
I'm sorry, my mic was off. Once again, thank you very much for this opportunity to talk at such a high platform. Let me express my surprise. I saw for the first time how the world is divided. we see the empire of the United States and its allies who don't want to listen to any arguments. We are very concerned. In August, the review conference will take place of this organization, but we need to ask a question and address it to Pentagon that controls all the laboratories in the world, in particular in Ukraine. They are conducting horrible experiments. God knows what is happening there. And people who want to verify that are not given an access. Let's form an investigative mechanism and lift sanctions on me or on somebody else, organize a visit of journalists, and let's address the United States Pentagon, open the laboratories, let us get an access to the first floor. You don't want to do that. And after that, we can see the outbreaks of unknown diseases. Why don't we organize such labs in France, in Albania? No, they have been constructed in the former Soviet Union, in Georgia, in Ukraine. You're saying that we are dangerous from the biological safety point of view, but in the 1990s, the Soviet Union collapsed and the Americans penetrated into our systems, into our facilities, but we don't know anything about them. Everything is hidden and it is concealed. And after that, you are saying that we are lying. We are telling the truth. We want to show people that biolaboratories deployed on other countries' territories and representing military divisions of the United States Army are dangerous for the world, and poor Ukraine, poor Georgia, and other countries are just test material for these laboratories. This is the most important thing, and we need to talk about it in August at the review conference. And we need to ask questions to the American government for them to let an international commission there to their laboratory, for them to tell what is going on there. But it will not happen because the Americans are trying to control the world. They're trying to establish their hegemony. They are an empire who will not let anyone check or verify their activity. But there are countries like India, like Russia, China, Mexico, are asking questions. And I feel sorry for Mexico because you live near the United States. So you need to resist them. Fight for your sovereignty. And Mr. President, thank you very much for letting me take the floor. Maybe my address was not well organized, but let me assure you that this problem preoccupies millions of people around the world, because this beer laboratory that under the control of the United States is dangerous for the whole world, for Albania, for France and other countries. Viruses kill. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arkady. Dilana?
Thank you. I will say just a few words because I'm very disappointed yet again.
Я очень разочарована.
During such a meeting at such high level, we hear again voices that this is propaganda. I already explained why for the United States and for the US media this is propaganda. Because behind all this story, we saw high-ranking US politicians and their sons involved. Anyway, here we are talking about the health and safety of our world. I would like to ask the French representative, do you agree if the United States built and equipped such a biolaboratory in your country and start experiments on your own soldiers, would you agree to continue the United States to continue such experiments on your soldiers if the decision of the Bioethics Committee of France is that these tests and procedures have unknown health risks for your soldiers? Do you think that this is normal? Do you think that it is permissible for whichever country you think of to allow such experiments with an unknown health risks to its soldiers? Why don't you allow the Pentagon to start this program in your country? Okay, you think it is fine, then take these biolaboratories, place them in your country, and allow your soldiers to be used as laboratory rabbits. If you think that it is normal, let it be normal for France. Explain to the French people why is it normal. The Pentagon is starting the same project in my country, Bulgaria, and Bulgarian people, the majority of them, don't agree with that, and they asked our government to provide all documents about this program. Our government denied our right to have access to this information. So here we are not talking about propaganda. I don't want to listen propaganda anymore. I provided facts. And the whole world is into this pandemic for 2 years. This must stop. All bioexperiments, be it for the benefit of the world or be it for other bad purposes, they must be transparent. We must know what's going on in these biolaboratories. Too many people have died already. We haven't learned the lessons from this pandemic. I'm very disappointed because what I've learned again today is that there is no consensus. Unfortunately, the health of the people, in this case, it doesn't matter. What matters is politics. Why didn't the United States send their representative here today? Why? Because I'm a journalist. My Russian colleague is a journalist. We have our questions. We have never, ever had the opportunity to ask our questions. Never. Would the French representative agree if the United States starts collecting biomaterial from French people for unknown reason? I don't think so. Thank you for your attention, and I hope that one day in the near future, the international community will agree that we need an independent international organization that will monitor on site what is going on in these biolaboratories, because it is not inspection if you invite in a certain day a delegation of journalists or experts and let them go around the laboratory to see what's happening. No, there are international mechanisms that must be implemented to control the activities on site in these biolaboratories. Thank you.
Thank you, Dilyana. I think that the thing that causes so many emotions in you is called rules-based international order, which is now being imposed by our Western colleagues, but it's not the topic of our meeting. I will not press my French colleague to answer, because this is not usually the practice of Arria-formulas that representatives of the countries answer this question. I leave it totally at your discretion unless you want to answer, but I'm not pressing you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dilyana. I really applaud your courage. I understand how risky it is for you to speak freely about such things in Bulgaria, in NATO and EU countries. So please take care, and thank you very much for participation. Dear colleagues, there is a famous saying that you can bring a horse to the river, but you can't make it drink. So what we try today is really to bring you to the river. I understand that some of you didn't want to drink from it because you were fearing that the water is contaminated, but the others just pretended that there is no river. It's of course up to you, but my appeal to you is really to pay attention to this situation before the river gets poisoned forever. And of course, I regret very much absence of our colleagues from United States and United Kingdom. I think it's first is evidence of their real attitude towards this problem, and the fact that they really have a lot of things to hide, and they don't want to give explanations on the awkward questions discussed here today. I thank everybody for your patience and participation, and wish you a good and fruitful day. Thank you. Деляне тогда просто напиши, что не